Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Tonight, the president touts his successes and hashes out his gripes in his first State of the Union address of his second term.
Members of Congress and my fellow Americans, our nation is back, bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before.
The president's theme, America at 250, strong, prosperous, and respected. His address laser focused on the economy.
Their policies created the high prices. Our policies are rapidly ending them. We are doing really well. Those prices are plummeting downward. The price of eggs is down 60%.
Making mention of his tariffs struck down by Supreme Court justices just days ago, discussing his new plan for tariffs and a new program to require tech companies to cover increased electricity caused by AI centers.
Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that I have negotiated the new Ratepayer Protection Pledge. You know what that is? We're telling the major tech companies that they have the obligation to provide for their own power needs.
International relations top of mind, including the rising tensions with Iran. Trump proclaims America's global dominance.
In 12 months, I secured commitments for more than $18 trillion pouring in from all over the globe. Think of it, much less than $1 trillion for 4 years versus much more than $18 trillion for 1 year. Our country has never been stronger. In my first 10 months, I ended 8 wars, including Cambodia. Isn't it funny?
Immigration and DHS funding, a hot topic for the president and Congress.
After 4 years in which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked, we now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far. In the past 9 months, 0 illegal aliens have been admitted to the United States.
A moment for his guests, including Erica Kirk and the U.S. men's hockey team.
Here with us tonight is a group of winners who just made the entire nation proud. The men's gold medal Olympic hockey team. Come on in.
And of course, the Democrats in attendance brought their own guests, too. But dozens of Democrats sat the State of the Union out, instead taking part in their own counter-programming, while Governor Abigail Spanberger of Virginia delivered the response.
Is the president working to make life more affordable for you and your family? Is the president working to keep Americans safe both at home and abroad? Is the president working for you?
Tonight, we have complete team coverage of President Trump's State of the Union. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. For the first time in his second term, President Trump stood before Congress and the American people to deliver the State of the Union. It was the longest State of the Union speech, and his message, our nation is back. At times boastful, at other times belittling. The president touted that the economy is roaring back like never before at a time when Americans are feeling the pinch. The address comes just days after the Supreme Court struck down most of its tariffs. And with 4 Supreme Court justices seated in the front row, Trump criticized the Supreme Court's decision. He touched on key issues like immigration, saying that the U.S. has the strongest and most secure border in American history, also demanding DHS funding be restored. The president announced that he negotiated the Ratepayer Protection Pledge with major tech companies, addressing the issue of rising power costs associated with data centers. There were tense moments within the crowd, specifically with Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, who we spoke with earlier today. We saw a Purple Heart presented to a National Guard staff member shot in an ambush in D.C. And a moment for the men's U.S. Olympic hockey team, a shout out from the president, who said he plans to award the goalie with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The president also made claims about rent prices, the cost of eggs, that he ended 8 wars, and once again made false claims about elections. Our Selena Wang has more in just a moment. But first, we are joined by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, the president said the roaring economy is roaring like never before. Our latest ABC News Ipsos Washington Post poll found that nearly 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of the president's handling of the economy. Do you think that his message tonight is enough to change the minds of those Americans who say that they're unhappy?
Yeah, well, first of all, that poll was an opt-in poll, so I kind of question that. And we had a gigantic jump in consumer confidence today. It was up 3 points, and more importantly, forward expectations are better. We had a fantastic jobs number this month. And what's important too is it's the private sector creating jobs, not like the Biden economy with government jobs.
Last Friday, the Supreme Court struck down part of the president's tariffs. The president tonight called it a disappointing ruling. He said that the tariffs will remain in place. In the days after that ruling, the president ordered a 10, then 15% global tariff rate. ABC News talked with the White House today. They said that the rate is 10%. Why hasn't that 15% global tariff that the president threatened over the weekend taken effect yet?
Well, there's a 3-day lag. It's not instantaneous, and at midnight tonight is when we actually stop collecting the other tariffs. And what I can tell you, Lindsay, is that Treasury estimates show that our tariff income for 2026 will be virtually unchanged. Whether it was with the IEEPA tariffs or with the new tariffs, we'll be moving to a Section 122, and then USTR and Commerce will be doing 301 and 232 studies, and we'll be layering those in within 150 days. So tariff income for the year is unchanged.
You said that any refunds on those tariffs are up to a lower court. Is the government prepared to pay back all businesses who do file a lawsuit with the Court of International Trade if the court rules that those tariffs must be paid back?
Again, I'm not going to answer hypotheticals. We'll see what the court does. There's an appeals period here, and then we'll see what the court says.
President Trump's tariffs cost the average American household $1,000 last year. That's according to the nonprofit or nonpartisan tax foundation. What's your message to Americans who see their cost of living rising and don't want to see those tariffs remain in place?
Well, again, I would dispute that $1,000, and what we're seeing too is we've seen the lowest mortgage rates in 4 years. We had the best performing bond market in the world, so interest rates are down, and many other things are down, and the average household has saved $5,000 because of the tax decreases. I'm also the IRS commissioner, and I can tell you that the president's signature the programs, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, they had no tax on Social Security, deductibility of American-made cars. 47% of the tax returns we've received thus far have applied for at least one of those benefits. So if I were the Democrats who voted against every one of those for working Americans, I would be worried here.
Tonight, the president announced a new retirement fund for some Americans. How will this program work? Where will the money come from? And who qualifies for the $1,000?
Yeah, we'll be rolling that out in the coming weeks and months. The president just wanted to let the workers who are not covered by 401ks know that this administration is working for them. So we'll be rolling that out over the next couple of weeks and months.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, we thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now I want to bring in our roundtable. Mary Bruce, Martha Raddatz, John Carl. Mary, let's start with you as far as what the White House believes. Did President Trump deliver in the way that they feel that he needed to tonight?
Well, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, says he knocked it out of the park. I mean, I think this is arguably the most disciplined we have seen the president in quite some time. He's tried to give sort of similar speeches recently, making the case for Republicans ahead of the midterms, and has always sort of quickly veered off topic. Today, he certainly stayed on message. He really hammered those domestic issues, immigration, the economy, where he knows voters are going to be focused come November, and where he knows the polls have shown that he is losing ground. He tried to draw very sharp contrasts with Democrats on the economy. He argued that, Democrats are to blame for inflation and essentially urged Americans to give his policies more time to work. And yes, some prices, as we've noted, are coming down, gasoline, eggs, but overall, the cost of groceries are up from a year ago. And that is what polls show Americans are feeling. It's why they say they're still feeling that pinch, as you just put it. And on immigration, the president is arguing that he's trying to keep Americans safe. He again and again, highlighted crimes by immigrants. He often tries to tie a line to criminality and immigration. But Democrats also argue that they are trying to keep Americans safe by demanding reforms to immigration. And that is why they are digging in on this partial shutdown that is ongoing, even though we just saw a State of the Union address. The president notably not mentioning, of course, those immigration enforcement tactics that got him, I think, some real negative pushback, even from many of his supporters, what we've seen in Minnesota.
John, kind of a two-part question for you. What do you make of a number of Democrats, 73 at least by our count, who simply didn't show up, more than a dozen walked out, really about the halfway point, about that split screen, the lack of the ability for both sides to come together into that room?
Yeah, it's something we've never seen in a State of the Union, empty seats. And it was a large number of Democrats simply didn't want to show up, and it crossed the spectrum. It was progressives, it was moderate Democrats, it was a significant proportion of the caucus, and that's where we are. I would say overall, in terms of the speech, I mean, this had the makings of it had real high moments of patriotism, great stories he told. He gave out 2 congressional medals of honor. He gave out a Medal of Freedom. He gave out 2 Purple Hearts. He gave out a Legion of Merit. He had, great stories to tell when he recognized people like Buddy Tackert, who's going to turn 100 on the 4th of July, a World War II veteran. But there was very little specifics about what he is planning to do the rest of the year, the rest of his term. And I thought, and I'm sure Martha has thoughts on this, especially striking is how little he said about the great national security threats, about how little he said about Iran beyond touting his strikes last year, and a single sentence or two about Ukraine. Very little about the challenges ahead and how he's going to turn around a presidency where a solid majority of Americans do not approve of his performance.
And I do want to bring that point to you, Martha, because when you have the headlines talking about the potential for war or this tension with Iran, were you surprised that there was such little said?
I have to say, I was surprised he brought up Iran at all, quite frankly. And Ukraine, I mean, we are at the 4-year anniversary. That war is starting the 5th year. The only thing he said about that was that war wouldn't have started if he was president. He had also said, as we all remember, that he would end that war before he was even elected. That has not happened. He had a summit with Vladimir Putin. There has really been no progress in the 1 year that he has been in office. As for Iran, we have 35,000 troops, 35,000 forces in the Mideast right now preparing for a possible strike on Iran. And Americans don't really know why. Now, he said tonight that they have started their nuclear program again. In the same paragraph, he said, we obliterated it last June. So the question is, okay, if they bomb and they're trying to take out more of the program in Iran, then what do they do next time? He says he wants diplomacy. There are some meetings scheduled to try to get some kind of deal. But Americans really, at this point, have no idea. He's denied that his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, warned him that there's a high risk of American casualties. We have so many bases in that region. He's denied that General Kane said that. He said on Monday that Kane said that an attack on Iran would be something easily won. I cannot imagine a chairman going in. The chairman's job is to tell the president the options that he has without recommending a policy, the options, the risks, and I suspect that's exactly what General Kane did, outlining the risks of a limited strike, of a larger strike, and any kind of sustained engagement. Lindsay.
Martha, Mary, John, thank you all so much for spending this night with us. As we mentioned at the top of the show, it was the longest State of the Union in our country's history. Our Selena Wang has the key moments.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
The president's first State of the Union address of his second term, lasting an hour and 48 minutes, making it by far the longest State of the Union address ever. But not there to hear it, more than a third of House Democrats, at least 74 who decided to boycott, part of a Congress Trump has often ignored, governing instead by executive order. He began his speech saying this is the golden age for America.
Tonight, after just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before, and a turnaround for the ages.
Touting parts of his big, beautiful bill.
We gave you no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security for our great seniors.
The president defending his record on the economy, attempting to convince Americans that he's focused on their top concern, affordability.
There was no inflation, tremendous growth, and the big story was how Donald Trump called the economy correctly.
Adding he and Republicans will lower the cost of health care.
That's why I introduced the great health care plan. I want to stop all payments to big insurance companies and instead give that money directly to the people so they can buy their own health care.
Yet even before listing his perceived accomplishments, Trump turning his sights to the 4 Supreme Court justices sitting right before him, 3 of whom were part of the majority 6-3 vote on Friday, declaring most of his sweeping tariffs illegal, levies he imposed without congressional approval.
Very unfortunate ruling. But the good news is that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deal that they already made, right, Scott? Knowing that the legal power that I, as president, have to make a new deal could be far worse for them.
Trump spending time applauding his administration's crackdown on immigration.
After 4 years in which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked, we now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far.
Trump did not mention the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, who were killed by federal agents in Minneapolis, going on to say he hoped to end sanctuary cities.
The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Isn't that a shame? You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed of yourself. That is why I'm also asking you to end deadly sanctuary cities that protect the criminals and enact serious penalties for public officials who block the removal of criminal aliens.
The president also mentioning the country's ongoing talks with Iran over their nuclear program, saying he prefers to solve the problem through diplomacy.
Since they seized control of that proud nation 47 years ago, the regime and its murderous proxies have spread nothing but terrorism and death and hate. They were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
In the gallery were more than a dozen Epstein survivors invited as guests of congressional Democrats. Some Democrats wearing white pins that read, "Stand with survivors, release the files." The president making no mention of Epstein or the survivors sitting before him. Ahead of his speech, House Democrats on the Oversight Committee accusing the DOJ of allegedly withholding some Epstein files containing allegations against Trump. And in a moment that broke with tradition, though not unusual for the president, Trump stopping his speech to welcome in the gold medal winning U.S. men's hockey team. Ending on another patriotic note, Trump had the First Lady award the Congressional Medal of Honor to Navy fighter pilot Royce Williams for his service in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Williams, 100 years young.
And Selena Wang joins us tonight. Selena, the president also spoke about his immigration policy, notably not discussing the weeks of unrest in Minneapolis. Tell us more about that exchange between him and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, there were a few tense moments between him and the Representative Omar. At one point, he was discussing Minneapolis, again, not addressing, as you mentioned, the weeks of unrest there or the killing of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, two American citizens, by federal agents, but instead he railed against the Somali community, using derogatory language to describe Somali Americans. And in that moment, you could see Representative Omar really shaking her head and taking deep breaths and sighs. Then later, the president said that those in the chamber should stand up when he mentioned that Americans should be the American government should protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. He said that those who did not stand up in response to that statement should be ashamed of themselves. Then the camera pans to Representative Omar. You can see her sitting there. She appears to shout at the president, "You have killed Americans." And when President Trump continued, "You should be ashamed of yourselves," Omar shouted back, "You should be ashamed of yourself." So the president trying to reclaim the narrative on immigration, but not really making an effort to reach across the aisle.
Selena Wang, thank you so much. Senior political correspondent Rachel Scott joins us now. And Rachel, you were there inside the chamber. Give us some color. What was it like inside tonight?
Yeah, well, Lindsay, notable, of course, were just how many empty chairs there were. Look, I have been inside of the House chamber for the State of the Union address for several years now, and this is the most empty seats that I have seen on one side or the other, and those seats only started to grow the longer the State of the Union address went on. By the end, I counted about 35 seats on the Democratic side that were just completely empty. You heard there from Selena talking about some of the outbursts that we heard, especially when it came to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and also Congressman Al Green. When the president was walking down the aisle, he tried holding up that sign, Republicans trying to get it out of his hand. I do want to note there were some moments of bipartisanship in the chamber as well. During these State of the Union addresses, we have seen more and more outbursts almost every single year, but particularly on the president's message when it came to Iran, talking about Operation Midnight Hammer, the operation that he carried out just last year, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. I did notice a number of Democrats standing, including Senator Elizabeth Warren. Nancy Pelosi was standing at one point. Former Democratic leader Hoyer was also on his feet at one point, applauding that mission, though the president notably did not really go into specifics on what exactly he would plan to do or give a reason why to the American people on a possible strike in Iran, which we know that he's considering, Lindsay.
Rachel Scott, of course, that has many people on edge. Our thanks to you, as always. And now let's bring in ABC News correspondent Elizabeth Schulze. Elizabeth, what do you make of Secretary Bessent's comments tonight about the economy and inflation?
You know, Lindsay, they are trying to spin a positive message on the economy here, picking out the numbers that are strong. When you think about inflation has been heading in overall the right direction and the stronger or at least steady economic growth numbers. One thing we haven't heard as much from Treasury Secretary Bessent or as much in the president's speech was an acknowledgement and sort of empathy of the reality that many households are living to paycheck, are struggling. And Lindsay, one thing we see, and this shows up in the data, especially those lower and middle income households are really feeling this higher cost of living for day-to-day essentials. The president tried to address some of those policies when you think about housing or other daily costs, but there is the reality that that is really where a lot of people still are feeling it every day.
President Trump made a rather large claim tonight that ultimately tariffs could replace income tax. Is that within the realm of possibility?
When you look at just the numbers alone, that looks really difficult, Lindsay. Income taxes in the fiscal year 2025 were about $2.7 trillion. So that is a huge source of revenue for the federal government, more than half of all the money that the government gets. Tariffs were about $200 billion, and that was before the tariffs were struck down by the Supreme Court. As you heard the Treasury Secretary say, they are hoping that a lot of these new tariffs the president has put in place will bring in more revenue. They were very clearly doubling down on the tariff strategy here. But at the end of the day, the president repeated his claim, Lindsay, that that foreign importers pay these. We also know it's businesses and consumers paying them too.
Elizabeth Schulze, thank you so much. The president's speech tonight was a chance to tout his record ahead of this year's midterm elections. Let's bring in ABC News political director Avery Harper. Avery, tonight President Trump touted his administration ended DEI in America. He saw a lot of applause. Many of the Republicans stood on that line. Your reaction?
That was really a base mobilizing comment. The notion of ending DEI, he was framing it as a promise kept. And that's the kind of culture war message that does mobilize and excite his base. So that was definitely some of the political red meat that we heard the president pepper through his speech that was largely focused on trying to address some of the issues around affordability and reclaim the narrative around affordability that we heard tonight.
November is still a ways away, but the president's speech comes exactly 1 week before the first voters head to the polls for primary elections in several states. What are we learning from early voting numbers?
Right. Well, we're seeing in both Texas and in North Carolina, some of the most competitive states that will vote next week in those first primaries, that there are more Democrats than Republicans turning out for our early vote. But I would caution that there's limitations on what we can glean from those numbers because as of late, early voting has become quite a polarizing issue, as evidenced by the president's remarks tonight. And Election Day vote is outstanding, which is a very important factor into who will come out on top on Election Day. But parties can use what's coming out of the early vote as an indicator of enthusiasm, and Democrats feel good about the numbers that they've seen so far.
Avery Harper, thank you. And let's bring in former Democratic Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp, and former senior advisor for Tim Scott for America, Matt Gorman. Thank you both so much for joining us. Matt, do you think that the president did enough tonight to win over those Americans who are still unsure, unconvinced about his agenda?
You know, I think one of the things he had to do tonight was give a template. I mean, look, the polls are going to go up, the polls are going to go down based off this speech for a couple of days. But what will live on is a template that he can give the cabinet, Republicans running down ballot to sell the economy, sell his agenda. And I think one of the first things I noticed when he was giving his speech tonight, he gave Republicans a template to go back on offense. I think Selena talked about it, the contrast between Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and him, the contrast between half the room standing for American citizens over illegal immigrants. I think those are the sorts of things Republicans needed to do to get back on offense, galvanize them, staunch the bleeding, so to speak, post-Minneapolis. I think that was important.
Heidi, you've said that this is not the reset Republicans needed. How so?
Well, Matt, I know that's wishful thinking, but the reality is that he is way underwater in the polling. People think this country's headed in the wrong direction, and he played his greatest hits. And it was a base play tonight. It wasn't a play to broaden the base, wasn't a play to bring back those voters that he got in 2024. And so I think this speech was nothing more than the greatest hits. Most people tuned out after about a half an hour. They got to see the hockey team. That was great. But this was not a game changer. But is any State of the Union a game changer? And Lindsay, I want to point out something that hasn't been said. This is the last time you'll see Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Dick Durbin, three great Democratic leaders, at a State of the Union. And we had a speech by a new governor with a whole different look. And so I think the Democrats are playing this right because they're putting a new look on the Democratic Party.
Matt, the president made it a point to single out Democrats when they wouldn't stand, for example, as you pointed out, that he called them crazy, saying the Democrats are destroying our country. What did you make of that moment?
It's a ready-made ad for Republicans at the NRCC, the NRSC, running down ballot to use against their opponents. I think, again, so much of this was staunching the bleeding from them, giving them a playbook they could use against their opponents down ballot. I've already seen both committees use that video. You're going to be seeing a lot more in the months to come. Again, I think the goal was the Democrats that did show up to this speech, put pressure on them with common sense stuff. Again, voter ID, banning trans surgeries for kids, things that are broadly popular, getting them on the wrong side of it.
And Heidi, I want to bring you back in here because you mentioned Governor Abigail Spanberger. She, of course, delivered the Democratic response. In her speech, she asked the question, is the president working to make life more affordable for you? You think that was an effective question to pose to the American people?
I thought her speech was brilliantly crafted. They could have done without the clapping. I think that interrupted some of the flow. But I think it was one of the best response speeches to a State of the Union in a long, long time. She's been on the stump for a year. She knows what she's talking about. And she's outlining for the Democratic Party, the way Matt describes the president outlining for the Democratic Party, how you win in states like Virginia by 15 points, how you win in in New Jersey, and how you're going to win, I think, potentially even in Texas and Ohio. And so this is a really good night for contrast, and I think she gave a much better speech than the president gave. Certainly shorter.
Heidi Heitkamp, Matt Gorman, we thank you both so much for staying up late with us. Appreciate it. To understand the impact of tonight's speech, we're joined now by ABC News contributor and presidential historian Mark Updegrove. Mark, thank you for joining us on this rather eventful night. First off, did anything from the president's speech tonight take you by surprise?
Not really, Lindsay. I think it was long. It was the longest State of the Union in history. That's saying something in and of itself. At times, it was a very good show. There was a lot of good flag waving, the recognition of the U.S. hockey team, the giving the Medal of Honor to two very brave veterans. There were some good moments, very good television moments. Donald Trump understands television. But I think the key question, as you mentioned, was posed in the Democratic response. Is President Trump working for the American people? I don't know that he addressed the issue of affordability in a way that will satisfy Americans, and we'll see how they respond to this State of the Union address and see if he can get up those poll numbers. But I didn't hear a lot of substance, Lindsay, that would lead me to believe that the president had an economic plan to alleviate the big problem on many Americans' minds, and that is the one of affordability.
Earlier, you said that the tone and accountability was going to play a huge role in whether the president's speech resonates with the public. What did you make ultimately of if in any areas you felt he nailed it, and what you felt that he missed tonight?
Well, again, I think he sort of went from flag waving to fear mongering back to flag waving. And again, I didn't hear a lot of substance about the economy. I didn't hear that the president understands what's on the minds of many Americans. He bragged about the price of eggs, for instance, being down 60%. He bragged about the price of gas being down, but he didn't talk about the pocketbook issues that I think are on the minds of voters and speak to the approval rating of 39% that ABC just saw in those polls. So not much there, again, of substance that I could see would resonate with the American public, Lindsay.
What did you make of the Democratic response?
Well, I think that was the right question. Again, if you look at the polls, that's what's on the minds of Americans. So that would be the question that she should pose. Ronald Reagan said when he was running against Jimmy Carter, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And he was elected in a landslide versus Carter because most Americans believed that they weren't in a better position. So Governor Spanberger, I think, raised the right question, which is, is Donald Trump working for you on the issue of affordability? And ultimately, it's going to hit the kitchen tables of Americans, and they'll decide for themselves, Lindsay.
Mark Updegrove, so appreciate your insight and time tonight. Thank you, as always. And that is our show on this night of the State of the Union. I'm Lindsay Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a good night.